Okay, people. So, we're in the war room now. And this is Uncle John's chair, right? So, I'm pretty sure it's December 10th, 2017. It's a Sunday. Obviously, I've been racking my brains over this, people. Like, when I left the courthouse, I went to the Access Resource Room, right? Where they help you with the forms and that type of stuff. And like I said before, I just asked how many days I have until I can appeal. I was told 30. So we're on the countdown, right? And obviously I'm behind on things with the document list. Still not done. You know, still haven't figured out how to put that notice of application in. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So, in the meantime, the person that works in there said 5 paragraphs, because I said, how much should I write in terms of putting it towards an appeal? He said 5 paragraphs. Does that mean little paragraphs or big paragraphs? You know what I mean? Like, that's five key points that, you know, I have like a very short window of time in order to convince an appeal judge to move forward, right? To not drop the case. So I'm like, okay, 5. If I give myself 10, and then, you know, go back to the Access Justice Center there, and, you know, and kind of like, well, which are the most, because I have a hard time determining what's the most important compared to, you know, what's kind of a little more on the bottom of the list with a lot of things. Not with everything, but with a lot of things I do, because, you know, a lot of things are important. So then I capped it off at 15 and want to push in 7 paragraphs. So you see, even with the 5 paragraphs, I don't feel comfortable with. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Because, again, we're dealing with a complicated case that involves a lot of acts, regulations, rules, mandates, and different, I wouldn't call them ministries, because they're not ministries, but they're different, and I don't want to say sections because they're more than sections, different sectors, I guess, maybe sectors, different sectors, where some of those sectors are union staff, and some of those sectors within the healthcare system, right, is contracted out, right? Obviously, through contracting, it's an erosion on the union sector. That's the first thing that the union sector would tell you. If it's a government service, and the government, especially under the BC Liberal government, they started downsizing, so they called it, right? In terms of the union worker within the ministry of, we'll say, health in this department, right? In this instance, I mean, it goes through all the ministries, you know, the education ministry and so on and so on and so on. So anyway, in the Ministry of Health, this is not how I wanted to start off this conversation, but we'll talk about this briefly, or at least I will, for a few moments, because it's important to understand that, well, at least I think it's important to understand that Fraser Health is just an offshoot of the Ministry of Health. So you've got Fraser Health, you have Island Health, and I don't know what the other ones are, but, you know, you have British Columbia, Canada is cut into regions, and each region has its main office. For the region of Fraser, like from Surrey on, I think that's how it goes. I don't even know what it looks like on the map, people, in terms of how large Fraser Health is in terms of its constituency compared to Island Health, which would be just isolated down to Victoria Island, up and down the coast, right? Either or, it doesn't matter. You're dealing with billions and billions of dollars, whether it's through contracts or whether it's through union. Okay. So, anyway, we're just gonna bounce around with this, right? So I'm like, I got 1, 2, we're bouncing 3, oh my God, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. At least 19 paragraphs developing. Okay. Now, some of them are just going around in circles, already been said, done it. They don't want to hear it. You know, if they've seen it, they ignore it. So, you know, I'm trying to isolate down how do you do this, right? On top of everything else that you do in a day. So, because, okay, I think it's fair to say that Fraser Health is using court cases to throw it out based on, and I feel like this, people, they prejudged me, they pre-found me guilty, and then they just set the court date to punish me, which is a skewed justice system, because I was put under pressure to tell our story in terms of, you know, I was already prejudged to be assumed guilty, and, you know, you had a very short window of time to defend yourself against a biased court system that is relying on court cases to throw out life-altering court cases, right, that can't even be truthful in the context of, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it where, and blatantly have it both ways, where John was released on his own accountance, where he just simply walked away and completely disappeared from Fraser Health without any obligation from Fraser Health to do a follow-up because they deemed him to be competent under their rules, regulations, and acts to protect themselves from lawsuits. But yet, on the other hand, right, how do you write this down so that you put it in front of an appeal board? But yet, on the other hand, that's the rules and the mandates, and that, you know, that, right, there's two ways of the, and with the fact too, if you think about it, with the fact too, and I know they're watching, and I guess this is just a one of those situations where everybody gets to learn something, right? Because they're bringing in their student lawyers. There was a student lawyer there that day, as the judge is telling me to go back to school. Like, what the heck, right? Okay, don't distract away from what I'm trying to say, because now I forgot what I was trying to say. So they rely on rules and regulations and mandates to protect themselves from being negligent. In other words, once John was released, as they would a homeless person, and the homeless person goes out and gets hit by a car, that's not Fraser Health's fault. That's the homeless person's fault for leaving the facility and then running across the street. Do you see? Once they're released, they're not responsible. Okay. I mean, they could be watching my videos just to see how they can protect themselves even more when the class action lawsuit comes, because maybe this time I'm not representing John, right? And I have no right to represent myself, even though we're John's immediate family, right? But let's just say I do manage to put together one day a lawsuit for the homeless people, and I'm their representative. Well, that's what Fraser Health is telling those people. Once we release you from the hospital, or you, well, I wouldn't say walk away, because if some people try and walk away from the hospital, depending on who they are and how much assets they have, they will send people after you if they want your assets. I've heard stories like that. The only thing is you don't know about it as a viewer per se, because most people don't take it to court because it's draining. It's draining, and it's a very unhappy situation. And you're already unhappy, so why add more to the misery? So, on top of, literacy skills, that type of thing. Some people just can't read and write, and, to the point where a court would even consider it to be legible. Anyway, so Fraser Health is relying on court cases where once they remove themselves from the file, as in terms of the patient is competent to walk out on their own, no matter what happens to them, they're not responsible for it. And they're sure to hell not obligated to tell the immediate family, as in the case of Uncle John's family, us, anything. They're not responsible to tell us anything, because we can't come with some old document saying that we're some long-lost relative to John, even though we hadn't talked to him for 30 fucking years, or 50 years, or whatever. Right? And then, but, okay, so that's what they're relying on when they said they released him. And that's why they don't know what happened to him. Even though within the first week of him being in the Surrey Memorial Hospital, they couldn't get it out of their heads fast enough in terms of how to get him into some sort of care facility that was going to build in a care plan long term. So first it was going to be convalescent care, and then from there, who knows? The point is they were already building in a plan within the first week, even before his infection had gone away, where they were going to put him into one of their extended care facilities. That doesn't sound like they're trying to release him if they're trying to do that within the first week before his infection is even over. But that's because there was an ulterior motive behind that, people. That's because the Duncan clan showed up and started lurking around in the hospitals with the Eleanor throwing around her fucking badge saying, I have seniority. But of course, Fraser Health doesn't want to acknowledge that, right? Alright. So, Fraser Health is relying on court cases to throw it out in the event of just whatever. They used the court case. Oh, see, I'm going to make a chart. This is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm doing this video, because I wasn't going to do any videos for about at least 15 days, so I can just seriously focus on this crap, right? But I have to talk it out, people. And not only do I have to talk it out, but I'm going to have to write it bigger than what I'm writing. And I might even have to bring that chart to court. Seriously. Because if you bring the chart to court, you can go boom, 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 and people can see it in black and white, and it will be that much harder for them to throw it fucking out. Okay? So instead of seeing it as, oh, I gotta make this chart, and, I should be thinking about bringing that chart to court. And then it becomes more meaningful. It becomes more just focused. Okay, now, I gotta defend myself, right? In terms of, I gotta put the appeal in. And I gotta make the court understand that it's not just about me. It never was just about me. Right? But they said that in court on Thursday. Well, it's just about you. It's just you. We did not represent you. Now, I don't have time, and nor would I, because I don't personally see it as appropriate to go start looking around for court cases to counteract what they're saying through a court case that probably doesn't even relate to anything that what I'm going through. And if it did, it would be a distraction away from those rules, regulations, and mandates through all those various sectors within the ministry that Fraser Health Authority is employed to manage. Basically. Right? Fraser Health is the overseer of all the union sector within the healthcare system under its region, as well as those contract workers that come in, you know, through their visas and whatever else or wherever else they come from. So I'm thinking to clear up this mess before it gets too wordy and just round and around and around. I've already fucking said it. And how many times do you have to say it, right? Maybe if I just do it like that, more poignant, more to the point, more to the exact act, more to the exact regulation, and versus the court case. Because I can't use court cases. I'm still trying to understand what some of them say when I read them. Never mind trying to find the right one which is applicable to us. When you actually have provincial rules, regulations, and mandates that these sectors within the healthcare system are supposed to follow, and it is the job of Fraser Health Authority as the boss to make sure that they follow them. So, if they release John on his own recognizance, you get my point. Recognizance? Is it a recognizance? Not cognizance, it's recognizance. On his own accord. Then there should be applicable regulations around that. Right? Through those rules, acts, and whatever I'm looking at myself. From my point of view. Because at the end of the day, they used a court case. They're playing double fiddle, people, right? You can't say that you released a man because he was competent and therefore you had no responsibility to him, as if it was that homeless person who left the building, crossed the street, but while the person was crossing the street got hit by a car and died. Even though Fraser Health knew that that person was sick when they released them. Right? Do you see how they're trying to cover their ass in the event of I should ever put together a class action lawsuit for the many, many, many thousands of people that are disenfranchised in the city of Surrey based on inadequate health care, among other basic human right issues in terms of housing and that type of stuff? They're trying to put me on equal to that page, right? But with Uncle John, he's a little more involved in terms of, he's not just some random homeless people on the streets people. He was a family member to this family for over 35 years, in addition to being in the home for 23 years as a codependent to the family. In other words, he was an equal, but he depended on us to help him through with his days and in light of his medical conditions, which Fraser Health is again playing double fiddle with, because they knew he was legally blind. They knew he had difficult walking even on his best days because of his injuries and health issues as a child when it came to purse disease and whatnot. They took advantage of that. They kept him in a wheelchair so that his body wasn't strong, as they conspired to transport him without being held accountable to that fact. Based on a court case that said the doctor had the right to make the decision for John, because John, under that particular court case, made John an infant, as in a minor child that couldn't make that decision for himself, but yet they released him as a functioning adult that was able to make that decision for himself. That's Alice in Wonderland. That's what Uncle John in his chair would call kangaroo court. And because I'm poor, I'm stressed out, I'm being gang stalked, right? I've had my daughter released onto my family like a freaking monster in terms of her addiction and not having nowhere to go, because Fraser Health can just simply let her go, and regardless of what happens to her, they're not responsible for it. But they know she's going to come home at some point, which, you know, at some point is going to have a backlash because she's not acting normal, right? She's not behaving correctly, right? She's causing a disturbance, right? She's annoying the neighbors. She's like an implant. This is what I tell my kids. Your sister is like an implant. They're setting us up as a family to fail with Andre, with these social workers coming in and out for whatever fucking reason, because I told you before, people, they're just building a case. And they're going to try at some point in the future, if not soon, to use Sierra as the excuse to say, well, you're obviously not doing a very good job because you can't control your daughter, even though your daughter has nowhere to go, and your daughter became the addict because of the initial social workers that threw her out in the middle of December in 2012, completely disconnected her from her methadone to the point where somebody in the community introduced her to heroin injection, which turned her into that addict, for the benefit of propping up the union sector, right? In terms of, you know, they need so many files open in order to get so many billions of dollars to keep the budget going for that fiscal period, right? And you don't want to, you know, no government wants to, have jobs lost. That's a political suicide, right? For any government to come in and start doing the right thing, even if it means having to fire some social workers because there's just not enough work for them, right? They're not going to do that, people. They're not going to do that. They're going to stage the situation where families fail so that these individuals within, you know, that particular system can continue working. They have something to work with. You take away the problem, they've got nothing to work with. Right? Okay. So they're playing double fiddle. They're trying to protect themselves from when they released him, in terms of whatever happened to him doesn't matter, because they were not responsible for him because he was a functioning adult when they released him. But then on the other hand, just to be sure, right, so that we can, you know, solidify this it's been dismissed situation, we're going to remind you that the doctor made the decision, right? And because John was incompetent and incapable of doing that. Hold on a minute. Okay, I only got about 17 minutes left here on this camera. So, they're playing double fiddle. They're covering both bases. And the court is coddling to that. Now, in terms of not submitting the documents and all that stuff, like I said before, people, it's not like I'm doing that on purpose. It's the fact that I'm probably submitting too much, right, in terms of the story. But again, I've never been in a court situation where I've had to be a lawyer and submit evidence, and I had to determine what was important and what was not important, right? And of course, there's a lot of things that are important. Mr. Lace is important. I'm submitting Mr. Lace's stuff in with this lawsuit, people, because we lost Mr. Lace. Don't forget, our rooster, right? Right? Because the city of Surrey took advantage of our disposition and used us as an example, even though you're going to find chickens still all over Surrey. So they never solved the problem of, you know, chickens being illegally housed in the city of Surrey, right? Because they took Mr. Lace. No, what they did is they made a mockery out of this family, and in addition to the nonprofit, because, you know, the city of Surrey is well aware that I've been doing videos for years, It was just, so not to distract away from what I was talking about here with Uncle John. So, being that the court doesn't listen to me anyway, and when they do, it has to be where I'm being stressed out. So anything I say is said under duress, right? Because, they're impatient with me, right? They feel like I'm just wasting their time, right? And they're coddling a corporation because they have to deal with this corporation day in and day out, as I'm sure multiple people come along and try and sue their ass, right? I'm sure this is not the first lawsuit that's kind of along these lines, so I'm sure they're experts at covering their ass. Because they can simply play double fiddle. And somehow, some way, I have to make this appeal judge see that. They can't have it both ways. They can't have it where he was either, one, walked out and disappeared and was fully competent and able-bodied as if he was 30 years old, right? Or, two, he was in a fetal position with the doctor standing over him saying, well, I think we're just going to release you because it's okay that you can crawl away from that situation as a child. How does that make any sense, people? So, this is how I'm going to try and figure it out. They're using the court cases where I, as myself, going to more rely on those rules, regulations, and mandates. I just have to figure out exactly what act and what rule it falls under, because there's so many. There's the Hospital Act, there's the Pharmacare Act, there's the Mental Health Act. They've already disregarded the Mental Health Act, even though they're still, through their court cases, using the Mental Health Act. If they're using the Mental Health Act through the court case, then they should be prepared to cough up the fucking proper paperwork with those 2 signatures from that psychiatric doctor that allowed him to just walk out on his own. Because the doctor said so. The doctor said it was okay for the child just to walk out on his own. Do you see the Alice in Wonderland kangaroo bullshit court that this has kind of been brought down to? As I'm being told that I don't have a right to represent somebody that I actually have legal enduring power of attorney over, in addition to his immediate family that he invested 23 years into as a codependent to the family so that he could survive, because his extended family basically left him to wallow in his own self-pity with somebody that was mentally ill and dragging him down with her? So I don't know, people. I don't know if I'm going to meet this deadline. That's what I'm going to tell my youngest daughter today. This is a lot of work to do under duress. I can't come in to it with, what do you call it? Like, I don't want to say critical thinking skills, but, not attached to it emotionally, right? Whereas if somebody comes in that's completely unbiased, right, to the pain that's associated around it, because this is what we were going through when John first got into the Surrey Memorial Hospital. Within the first week, within that first meeting with that first social worker, the only thing that social worker wanted to know was who had power of attorney sign here. And I'm like, no, let me talk to John first. How is John feeling? What is wrong with John? Is John better yet? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that we're making plans to put him into convalescent care, and you need to sign here right now, because if you don't, it's going to be a war. And I said, well, if that's the case, then maybe you should remove yourself from John's file appoint somebody else, right? So that we can get fair representation as a family. Well, Uncle John said after that, when we had our little meeting on video, that if he was alone, he would go into convalescent care because they had already asked him, you gotta go. No, I don't want to. I have a family. I want to go home. I'm not alone. No. That's not true, John. You are alone. And you know what? Since you don't seem to think that you're not alone, we're going to find a fucking way to make it so that you do become alone to the point where you gladly accept that old folks' home as home. Because ultimately, that's where we're going to get you, John. And you watch and see. This is the social worker talking to John. And then she passed the fucking file to the next social worker to make sure that that social worker hammered in the nails. By any means necessary. Got it on video, people. In her own words. He's going to convalescent care by any means necessary. And if it's not that, then it's his sister's house out in the fucking country. With nobody there to watch him properly. With strangers. They sent him away with strangers. As they completely disregard his immediate family, who looked after him as a family for over 23 years. So, it doesn't look very promising, does it? Right? I have to find a solution in the next fucking 20 days. Under the law. As they throw more court cases at me and some gullible judge that is something. I don't know. Is something. Wants to pass the buck. Because he knew I was going to appeal. Right?